Mr. President, point of personal privilege.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, last Thursday, this body failed to pass its own version, our own version of the budget. And I would suggest, Mr. President, that the failure to do that was a very historic event in this body. In comments from the members on that day and afterwards, there's been some talk of a previous occasion when a Senate budget was approved, but it failed to receive bipartisan support. Mr. President, that was my first year here in the Senate as a member of the Virginia Senate. And I recall that all of the members on this side of the aisle voted against the approval of Senate Bills 29 and 30. But, Mr. President, I think it's important to point out that our objection to both of those bills was based on what we were concerned as not being sound fiscal policy. We had genuine disagreements over the budget. Specifically, Mr. President, the Republican senators objected to excessive use of debt in both then Governor Kane's introduced budget and the Senate amendments to that budget. Specifically, the debt was based on borrowing from the VRS, something that seemed to exacerbate over time. That budget was based on unrealistic revenue projections that Senate Republicans firmly believed then, and I think have proven to be accurate since, that the revenue assumptions on which the budget were based were far too generous or far too aggressive. And not only has history proven that concern to be accurate, but as a result of those inaccurate assumptions, Virginia entered a 3-year cycle of budget shortfalls. And that budget included an expansion of funding for pre-K programs, even though the funds that had previously been allocated for the purposes were not exhausted. And finally, that budget included a transfer from the state's literacy fund that we thought, frankly, was unconstitutional. So 4 years ago, Mr. President, members on this side of the aisle did vote against a budget, but we voted against it because of policy reasons, of fiscal policy reasons. Today, we are in another standoff regarding the budget, and one, Mr. President, that ultimately may lead to a government shutdown. And, Mr. President, I would just suggest to this body that if we're going to jeopardize the funding for schools, for health care to our seniors and others, for public safety, for local governments, for colleges and universities, Mr. President, I would hope that that would be about issues of policy and not of politics. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator.